it's Matt Roush.
And Mike Brennan.
And we're back with a virtual episode of the M Squared TechCast. We are, like most people these days, talking about the coronavirus pandemic, and we have a genuine expert with us now, Fred Brown. Fred, why don't you tell people, first of all, sort of establish your authoritativeness here. Tell us a little bit about your background in the healthcare industry to start with.
Event that I had to coordinate was HIV, and luckily our lab was the first lab to develop a test that actually identified the HIV virus, and we rolled that out to tests all over the world. That really helped control the HIV virus and got us in control for therapeutics. And I've then worked on Ebola and Zika and SARS and H5N1 and so on as they rolled through the population. This is the first time we've had to do this in the United States. I've done this probably 5 or 6 times as a manager responsible for managing demand of critical drugs.
All right. So, well, you wrote a, shall I say, scary blog that you posted. I read through it carefully, and your thesis is prepare for a long haul through September.
Yeah, that's based on my experience. In my experience, we're not as organized as we probably should be at this point to control the virus as quickly as we'd like to. And what concerned me was that we weren't getting very much attention to the virus already in February and March. And so I started to blog. And as a result of the blog, people started to ask me questions. And one of the questions that came back was, how long is the shutdown going to last after we started the shutdown? It was a friend of mine in Austin, Texas. He said, "Oh, look, I'm signing deals. I've got rent to pay. I'm a real estate guy. What should I think about in terms of coming back to work? When are things going to get back to normal if I've got to close deals personally, shake people's hands, and get all over the United States and world?" And I said, well, in my estimation, I actually used the model very much like the one that Mayor Cuomo is using in New York. And in my estimation, using that model and being conservative, that basically we would go through a peak in the United States of mid to end of May, be conservative, identifying end of May. And then in order to make sure you're really done with the infection rate, then you have to wait for, unfortunately, this virus takes a long time to work through its system. It takes 40 days to go through a complete cycle of disease. And so you had 40 days, plus you're not really sure whether you really stopped it. And so I thought, for breakout areas, you'll probably have to wait about 100 days, which is what they did in China. And for non-breakout areas, if your community is lucky enough to miss it, it'll be about 60 days after we think we've got control of the peak, at the peak. So putting that together, you get kind of early August for the non-breakout areas and late August for the breakout area, late July for the breakout areas, for the non-breakout areas, and late August for the breakout areas. If we're lucky. If we're not lucky, we jump back into the situation too quickly. Everyone gets reinfected again. It takes a while for the virus to ramp that back up. We won't detect that because we don't have enough testing in our system yet in order to detect when the virus is simply moving back and forth. And around Thanksgiving, we'll have another huge breakout, which would be very unfortunate. So that's why I would say, to be conservative, we probably have to wait until late August before you really plan to have significant normalcy in your life. Probably September, you can start to think about being normal again if we're lucky.
Now, one of the things I mentioned to you when we were talking before the show was I watched the news report this morning where the FDA has approved some sort of antibody virus detection. And again, this is not my area of expertise. But we would tell whether someone had the immunity, had gone through the disease, and therefore could go back to work. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, you just watched me touch my face twice during that discussion. That's what you shouldn't be doing, just to let you know. So basically there are several different kinds of tests we have in order to detect disease. And one of them, what we're using right now, is actually detecting the DNA, and that's the Pcr test that's being used right now. And that was from a company that I used to work for, Hoffman LaRoche, developed this test. It came out very quickly because you can very quickly get the DNA available for the virus. And the problem with that test is it takes, if you're very, very good with it and have a very automated environment, you can get it done in 45 minutes. Most of us don't have those kinds of capabilities. About 168 labs in the United States do. So normally it takes about 2 hours to really get a good test result, and that's if you're lucky enough to get a sample with the right conditions and so on. So there's there's a small chance that you won't even get a sample, even if you have the disease, to be able to test properly. So the ELISA test, these are the antibody tests, excuse me, these antibody tests actually detect antibodies. Usually these antibodies are developed about 5 days after you acquire the disease. So after 5 days, your body says, hey, there's something foreign in my body, and they develop antibodies to start to reroute the disease and start to attack the disease. And at this point, you can actually detect in your blood whether or not you've got these antibodies. And that's extremely important, because what happens in these diseases is that you can tell who's been infected. Because we don't know right now, we don't have enough data to know right now whether or not you've been infected or not. We don't know what they call asymptomatic levels of the disease are. And that's very important to know, because about 81% of us right now, according to what we know, won't really have much symptom or will have a minor condition. Within that 81%, we're not sure what percentage, it's between probably 30 and 50% of those people actually don't have any disease at all. They'll have a little cold or sniffle, they won't realize that they have the disease at all. And knowing that who has antibodies is important, because as you start to roll out, there's an immunity conferred that occurs because you've got these antibodies. And so one of the big therapeutic areas that has the biggest chance of working fastest is if we can find those people who have the antibodies, pull the antibodies in their blood out into and spin that blood down and give it to people who are really sick, so they've got a better immune system available. So not only are these antibody detection systems important to understand who has the disease, who doesn't have the disease, that's a diagnosis. Also, it's important to understand monitoring who has had the condition and who has not had the condition. And then from there, you can actually start to do some defensive work therapeutically. And that's probably about 3 months away. Just to give you a sense, when I was doing this for Roche, I was responsible, my team was responsible for Tamiflu distribution as well as test distribution. We could tell by the time, you've never heard of H5N1, but that almost broke out. And luckily we had Tamiflu, which stopped the flu's length and the severity of symptom, and we had diagnostics tests. So by the time at the end of the epidemic that was breaking out in Europe, we could tell virtually, we only had about a third of the drugs we needed at the time for capacity reasons. We could tell exactly who needed to get the drug to stop the disease, create the herd immunity, and prevent it from spreading. And we were about just a few days away from it really breaking out into the world. So it's that close. And to give you a sense of the level of testing you'll need, I did the numbers, and it's about, we talk about how many tests we've done so far, about 845,000 tests. That's starting in January to today. We'd have to do that every 3 days for the rest of the year. Oh. I'm sorry, for another year to get to the level of testing that we were at to control the H5N1 outbreak. That gives you a sense of how far behind we are testing.
Why is it taking so long to ramp up mass production of the tests?
Well, you have to get enough of the antibody. The antibody has to be stable. This is a living system that's creating the antibody. You've got to format the tests. Luckily, these tests are much more available than PCR tests. There are 18,000 machines like this outside the United States versus only 168 that we had for the PCR test. Korea has a testing capacity of about 100,000. They are at about the right level. They can give us a few of those tests, but that's sort of, and they're 1/6 of our population. That gives you a sense of where we are. Luckily, these tests have moved then from a 2-hour pattern to about a 15-minute pattern. You can even get a negative result. You can get a positive result in 5 minutes, a negative result in 15 minutes. So you get a sense of how much faster the throughput is and how much more capacity we have to do these tests. Another nice thing about these is they go through the mail a lot better, so we'll be able to involve a lot more tests. But if you talk right now, for example, to Beaumont, they can do about 400 PCR tests a day. That's all. And they had 8,000 requests in the last couple of days. So you can get a sense of when people saying, we got to get better with testing, we got to get really better with testing. Otherwise, we're going to be, and that's why I'm saying that it's unlikely that we're going to be able to control the virus that well already. So yesterday it was revealed that the U.S. government was using someone named Chris Murray's model. He's on the University of Washington, excellent epidemiologist, obviously. And but if you look at his material, it looks like the test goes up and down very rapidly. I'm sorry, the disease incident goes up and down very rapidly in the United States, throughout the whole United States. And my assumptions were that it's going to be hard to make that happen. That everywhere is going to break out about the same time and get better about the same time. I don't think that's likely, but that was one of the simplifications. So you can look at every state, which I didn't do.
Matt, you have some questions?
Yeah, I was just curious. The people that are considered essential workers, what precautions do you suggest they take in the current environment?
Yeah, that's a great point. So there are a couple things. There are non-essential workers, and then there are essential workers. For the essential workers, you should really confirm, number one, that you've got to do the work personally, physically there. If you don't have to do the work personally, physically there, or you can transfer the work to someone else who is already there or already, then do that. Don't go to a site just because you're an essential worker and can. If you can work remotely successfully and complete the tasks, do that. Do not go out, even though you are an essential worker and officially you're allowed to show up. And if you don't have that equipment, then buy it and do it at home. That's number one thing. Number two is if you're living with a family, then essential workers who are in healthcare know this already, but you should really have a facility where you can disrobe outside your door, signal the family that you're coming in, have them clear out the area where you need to get to take a shower, take an immediate shower, soaping all the way through your body, and preferably with a special chemical soap, which it's called. I'll send it over to you with the name of it. Special chemical soap is it creates a film that prevents viruses from coming back onto you, and then it's a hexachloroidine, but it's a pink soap you can buy in the pharmacy, or have it shipped to you. Don't buy it in the pharmacy. Ship it to you, and then when you're done taking your shower, come out with gloves and safety protection on. Put your dirty clothes and equipment on. Wipe it all down. Throw it in the washer. Wash it and dry it under high heat, and wipe all the things you've used that day, including your truck and everything else, down completely with a soaking alcohol disinfectant that should remain on the equipment for at least 2 to 3 minutes in a wet form before you wipe it off.
Wow, it's like a bad horror movie or something,
Yeah. And if you're not an essential worker, and especially if you've got any prior condition, if you're young or old, your chances of a fatal incident with this COVID-19 doubles if you smoke. It doubles if you have heart condition. It doubles if you have diabetes. The numbers are actually, somewhat worse than that for heart condition, actually. So you're moving from you're moving from about a 1% chance of dying to a 10% chance of dying. It's literally that bad. So, and then as you get older, you move from a 1% chance of dying to once you get to our age, you're talking about a 3.5% chance of dying. And if you're talking about someone who's in their 80s, it's a 14 to 15% chance of dying. So the people who get sick and are likely to have illness will know it within about 8 days. They'll be on ventilators, and if you go on a ventilator, you have about a 50% chance of living, depending on the hospital you go. It could be as good as 30%, but usually it's 50-50. So that's the sort of risk you're taking right now. If you are elderly with an underlying condition, do not go out. Do not go near anyone in the family who does go out, because if you're with a family, the chance of getting the disease equals the weakest link in your family. That means, even if you're completely perfect, sanitizing regularly, wiping down surfaces every day at least, and more often than that every time you touch them, even if you're preparing food right, if your family member goes out and gets the disease, that's your level of risk you're facing.
Wow. So don't gather the family for Easter, clearly, right?
No, that was one of the things I was most worried about. My friend in Austin said, well, I just, invited everyone over for Easter. We're going to have a big celebration, get all my contracts signed and everything's going to be great. And that's when I started to do the math.
Huh. All right, so there's been talk of various treatments. There's that malaria treatment that seems to be floating around the internet as a possibility. Most people are saying vaccines are still at least a year away, if not more. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so it's going to be difficult to control this disease until we do have either a treatment or a vaccine. So we'll have to have significant social distancing measures in place, even if we have control of the disease, and even if it becomes sort of a rolling condition through the world, until we have a vaccine or an effective treatment. The most likely effective treatment in the short term is what they call a serum treatment. You combine sera of people who've already had this disease, spin it down, and inject it into people who are at high risk. That confers an immunity on them, similar to the kind of immunity you'd have if you got the disease and survived it. Then you'd have antibodies in your system that would help you do that. That was the calculation that was made by President Trump when he decided to hold off on lifting the shut-in operations past Easter. Was that they calculated that if they did this and let the virus simply run, let everyone get herd immunity, it would probably kill about 2.2 million Americans. My numbers were a little bit higher than that because I was being more conservative, but it's in that range. It's in the kind of 1 to 4 million range. So that's why he correctly said, we had an aspiration, we wanted to hit Easter, but I can't do it. And that was the number that he looked at to say, it doesn't make sense yet. And he'll continue to look at those numbers, I'm sure, as time goes on. So that's a good sign. And then, so where was I? I'm sorry. What was that?
We were
talking about treatments. I wanted to ask you about. I've heard that there's a.
So I'm sorry. So the treatment, that sera treatment is going to be the most effective one in about the next 3 to 4 months. We'll be able to, like who have the disease, the ELISA assays, and they'll be able to treat people with a mixture of sera, hopefully in about 3 to 5 months.
How about? I've also heard that there's a blood pressure drug that's being. I've heard that there's a blood pressure drug that's a possibility as well as sort of some kind of palliative.
Well, yeah. So the way the disease progresses is twofold. Number one, that you get an infection. The infection can be controlled by antiretrovirals, and those are the ones you're hearing about that end in VIR at the end, and remdesivir and a few others. Remdesivir is the Chinese one, and these have a lot of side effects, but they can be quite effective. And basically what they do is they stop the virus from reproducing. That's phase 1 of the viral infection. The next stage of the viral infection is it starts to cause a lot of inflammation. And in order to stop the inflammation and the destruction of what they would call a cytokine storm, to stop it from hurting your body, what happens is your body over-responds to the infection, to the viral infection, and it starts to eat itself. And so if you look at these people who are dying, what happens is they actually have holes in their lungs where the body's eating itself, which is a permanent problem, even if you survive the infection. Wow. And then, of course, you are very open to getting other infections like pneumonia that'll also kill you more rapidly. So you can imagine that there are a number of drugs in the area that are trying to actually reduce that cytokine inflammation. And then there are more palliative drugs that people are looking at to try to reduce inflammation symptoms. So those are the kind of 4 areas of drug work. And it's going to take us about 3 months to get this monoclonal antibody cocktail spun down in sufficient quantity to even start the process of looking at people. It'll take, with existing drugs, we could have them on the market more quickly, but there's some, but we have to, the FDA will have to do some specialized testing called with master protocols that allow them to look at all the different drugs that are out there. There are about 70 out there right now. WHO feels have an opportunity. None of them are considered what we would call, a high likelihood of success. But there are, at least they have some likelihood of success. And then it's going to take about 12. The fastest I've ever gotten a vaccine in the market is about 14 months. They have new technology out there that could get it down to as little as 12, but they've never been successful. So these are the nuclear vaccines that are, very specialized and new to the market. They're a little bit safer. They use a platform instead of a completely new construct each time, and so you can get them through this regulatory process more rapidly.
So we talked about this again before we started the show, and in the summer in Michigan, that's when everybody gets together, goes to sporting events, goes outdoors. Can we actually do that this summer?
Well, by yourself you can, absolutely.
No Comerica Park or anything, right?
Yeah, or if you're married and have regularly with somebody, that's probably safe. I wouldn't get together with until the CDC says we have control and we are treating patients on an individual rather than a population social separation basis. I wouldn't get together in large groups. The way to figure out how big the group can be is you measure your room and you figure out 6 feet of distance between everybody, and then you can figure out about how many people you can have in the room. If you go outside, it's a little bit easier. Other thing that's good about outside is that it has more ventilation. More ventilation is important. And then, of course, you want to keep all of the hand washing going. You want to keep all of the disinfectant, the disinfectants and sanitization of surfaces going in that process. So generally, it's going to be more difficult. We might have I wouldn't count on this, but some coronaviruses are more susceptible to heat, and so as it gets hotter, and especially as it gets more humid. The reason that the virus spreads is because there are droplets in your sputum, and so as it gets more humid, these droplets can't travel quite as far. So there's a slight reduction in the amount of space you can have between you. In the lab, we use laminar airflow, which again blows things away so that we can get slightly higher concentrations of people in. But I wouldn't risk it until August. Until the CDC says we're at a point of containment and we've got a way of managing individual patients as they come through the door.
Traditional four-year students love Lawrence Technological University's thriving campus life, but LTU has always met non-traditional students' needs too. Lawrence Tech offers over 100 degree and certificate programs that can get adult students started or back on track. And most of our classes are conveniently offered evenings at our beautiful Southfield campus or online, so you can balance your social, family, and work life even while you power up your career. Lawrence Tech, where Blue Devils dare.